Well, good morning, everybody, and thank you all for coming out. It's great to see everybody here, and thank you for the university for putting the spotlight on clean energy today, so we're all happy about that. So I'm Tom Acker. I'm a professor of mechanical engineering here at NAU. I'm also the director of our newly formed Institute for Sustainable Energy Solutions. And what I'd like to do this morning is take a few minutes to talk to you about something I've been working on, and that's called integrating renewable energy into the electric grid. And I'd also like to more broadly talk about our new Institute for Sustainable Energy Solutions. This picture actually is of Perrin Ranch out near Williams, and you can see the San Francisco peaks in the background. So this is one of our wind power plants in the state. So really, I want to connect the old with the new. So how did we get started? In about 2000, we had the the Sustainable Energy Solutions Group, a collection of faculty started up to work on issues related to clean energy. And really what drove the way we went were the roadblocks we perceived. So the first roadblock was really a natural one, and it had to do with wind energy and the wind resource. So wind power was becoming inexpensive. People were putting it in across the nation. But one of the problems here in Arizona is that there's no wind resource in Arizona. That was the prevailing opinion. So we worked with our state utilities, with the National Renewable Energy Lab, and we were able to come up with a fairly accurate wind map for the state, which you see up here on the slide. And that really shows where the wind is at the state if you want to develop wind power, and also let us deduce the magnitude of the wind resource. And we were able to come up with a developable amount of wind power in excess of 25,000 megawatts. So if you were to develop all you could get, that's probably where you would be. And as it works out, the load in Arizona, the electrical load in 2020 is estimated to be about 20,000 megawatts. So you can see that's a pretty significant amount of power by any measure. I mean, you guys all drove in this morning. You know that it's definitely windy here at times. Our next roadblock was more of a man-made one. It's one we came up with ourselves. And so after we got our hands around the wind resource, we moved on to looking at wind integration. And really that has to do with electrical system balancing. So we use electricity whenever we want to use it. And electricity is a little bit hard to store. It's a little bit expensive to store. And so you really have to generate the electricity when you're going to use it. And that's the balancing act, so electrical system balancing. What you see in this picture up here is 1 week of electrical load up in the Pacific Northwest. And you can see the days are these repeatable patterns. The weekend days use a little less power than the weekdays. And there is variability in this electrical consumption that the utility has to deal with. They have to figure out how to meet this variable electric load. They also have to forecast that load and come up with ways to set up their system and run their electrical generating units. So that's really what's involved in balancing the system. This line on the bottom you can see here is the wind energy that was coming into this system over this particular week. And you can see there's some days where there's no wind and there's other days where there's wind. And that really makes a challenge for the electrical system operator to know how to operate this system reliably and cost effectively when you're starting to bring in new resources that are variable and hard to forecast by their nature. And so that's really what integration of renewable energy is. So there's been, in the last decade, many studies done to look at integrating renewables on the grid. One of the bigger and more significant ones that has occurred and that we worked on was the Western Wind and Solar Integration Study. This really went on between 2007 and 2010. So looking at integrating renewables in the grid. And really this study looked at the entire Western interconnect because all the electrical system tends to run together. But a real focus on these states that are in dark, Arizona, Nevada, New Mexico, Colorado, Wyoming, to look at integrating 30% of the electrical energy from wind power, 5% from solar. So a pretty aggressive goal, pretty significant amount of renewable energy. I'm not going to go into the details of what was done. We worked on this with GE, the National Renewable Energy Lab, and actually several others, quite a big project. But one thing that came out of this study is that it is technically possible, without compromising anything to do with grid security, to meet the loads using that much renewable energy. And that you can do it cost effectively. It's feasible economically to do that. So those are two key results out of the study. Another result, back up here, another result is really that you cannot do it unless your utilities really work together to balance the system with that large amount of renewable energy. Right now, our electrical system is set up with basically individual utilities that balance our system. That's the way it is through the Intermountain West. It's not like that across the entire United States, but it certainly is here in Arizona. And in order to really integrate large amounts of renewables, the utilities have to work together. And so coming up with the legislative and regulatory structures to help our utilities do that is one of the challenges we're facing now, as well as coming up with new operational structures and markets for the utility to operate in. So there's one of the directions we're headed with the work of the Institute, is to help us transition into a clean energy system for electricity. Okay, so I've got one more analogy I want to bring you to, which is one of the challenges we're facing, and it has to do with peak capacity. So utilities do a lot of work, and a lot of their planning is, how do I meet the peak load? Arizona, that's in the summer for a few weeks when it gets very hot and all the air conditioners are on. And so the analogy I want to bring here when thinking about this problem is the trip I took last summer with my family. We went camping up in Sequoia National Park, an absolutely gorgeous place to visit if you ever get the chance. Well, what we did is we pulled a camper up to Sequoia. So we've got an SUV and we pulled our camper up to Sequoia. See if I can do this without hitting the buttons. And we had a great time. And so as a family, we own this Sequoia. We own the camper. We have to pay for that. We use it about 20 days a year at the most. So our peak recreation is used 20 days a year. And so we spend money all year paying for these things, even though we really only use them 20 days a year. And so I don't like to live with a 10 mile per gallon, or actually 14 mile per gallon Sequoia coming to work, so I don't. I have a Corolla, it gets 32 miles a gallon. I drive that to work every day. It does a lot of the commuting, soccer practice, you name it. Okay, so I've got my Sequoia, which I use on my peak days. The rest of the year, I want something much more efficient. Okay, so getting to the next roadblock, the next challenge we face is, how do utilities develop peak capacity? This is from the Arizona Public Service Integrated Resource Plan. They did a particularly good job making a visual representation of what all the utilities, really everywhere, but especially in the West, deal with, and that is, how do you plan for peak capacity? And so this actually shows cost per megawatt hour energy of delivered electricity versus your resource. So it turns out energy efficiency is the cheapest way to meet your peak load. So they're looking at cost to meet peak load. Gas, natural gas is the next cheapest, followed by solar photovoltaics. Wind power, coal, and then nuclear actually are the most expensive. New nuclear and coal are the most expensive. So you won't see much of that coming on the grid. The actual cost to generate is represented by the orange and the blue. So you can see the wind and the solar actually are quite competitive with natural gas. These big green bars that are lopped on top here are the cost to make sure you can provide firm energy on peak. So I'm going to spend a lot of money to get some natural gas turbines, for example, in addition to the wind and solar, so I can meet that peak load. So this is the cost of paying for that Sequoia to use it for 2 weeks, when really I just want the efficient part for the rest of the year. So one of our challenges in renewable energy and clean energy development is making those bars small. And we can certainly do it. There are ways this can happen. And so one of the things we'll be doing in the Institute is working on problems and topics that'll help us shrink those to where renewable energy can really be a significant part of our electrical future. Current activities, just to finish up here, we're working with NextEra and Babbitt Ranches on a solar variability study to understand how variable solar energy would be coming into the grid. A couple of students here, one of them in our audience, that are collecting data out on the Babbitt Ranches last fall. We're finishing up a wind and solar integration study with Salt River Project. We've just started a contract with the Department of Energy called their Water Power Vision Report, where we're mapping out the future of hydropower, including tidal and other new forms of hydropower in the future. Just got an award from the National Renewable Energy Lab for a collegiate wind turbine design competition. Raise your hand, Karen. She'll be leading our efforts on that next year. We're working with the Institute for Tribal Environmental Professionals and our Tribal Clean Energy Resource Center to do tribal renewable energy development. We've just got a project starting up with that. Carbon neutral liquid fuel is actually a very exciting and progressive research topic we have going on. Eric and Steve, raise your hands. If you're interested to know how to make a liquid fuel out of gaseous carbon dioxide and hydrogen, these are the guys to talk to. We're going to be doing some off-grid renewable energy development. You'll hear about that, some of that from Dr. Kipple, and electricity storage for renewables, which is very important when you get to 40, 50% renewable energy. You really need energy storage. It's got to be inexpensive. And Dr. Chakana will be talking about a very interesting project he has going on related to that. And so that's all I have. And did I leave any time for questions?
I think